Welcome to another episode of Marketing Monday. I am here with Malissa Illiano. Did I do that right? I ask you this every time, right? I'm always afraid I'm going to butcher it.
No, it's Illiano. It's fine.
Man. I was supposed to ask that before I started online, and I didn't. And you're with SageAge, and I'm really excited about a conversation today. We're going to talk about market penetration, and market studies, and how to think about the market. One of the things that we know is that we've been sort of on this 3-year recovery, right? Nick has talked about that, but before we get into it, we are going to take a look at our intro. So I'm going to confess, I'm a little out of it this morning. I tried to do a big backpack trip over the weekend. It did not go well. It wasn't a disaster. It was harder than I could tackle. I came back and I was exhausted yesterday, and I realized I'm still feeling a little bit of that. So if you're thinking, what's wrong with that guy? That's what's going on. Okay, let's jump into the Nick data and kind of what we're seeing. I really want to hear what you're seeing and what you're thinking as you look at this.
Absolutely. So I think I brought a slide that kind of covers some of this data. Perfect. So Nick put out earlier this year their Senior Housing Analyst Review and Outlook report. And all these stats were in that report. It kind of covered I want to cover three major areas. So, we get asked all the time, what are you seeing occupancy-wise across the industry? And, like you said, we've seen this kind of 3-year recovery that our clients have continued year upon year to improve the occupancy. And what Nick is reporting across the industry is that occupancy is expected to grow somewhere between 8 and 14%. They were looking at 2023 out to 2026. So, really good growth out through 2026. And when you're looking at kind of what that means per community, they're projecting that most communities are going to be in the mid 90% occupancy by 2026. So that's great news for the industry as a whole. New construction. So obviously during COVID, it kind of brought all construction projects to a halt. No one wanted to kind of even think about venturing into the senior living space during that time. So obviously we saw a drop in new construction projects. If you're looking at the actual stats of that, between 2017 and 2019, inventory grew 3.2%. But then from 2021 to 2023, it cut in a little more than half, and it was only 1.3%. So really, when you're looking at the next topic here and the population and the growth, it wasn't keeping up with things, right? Because now when you think about the population and what's happening, we've got boomers, the younger boomers that are aging into or starting to consider senior living communities. When you look at those huge population statistics, households with members that are 80 years or older is projected to increase by 1 million from 2023 to 2026. And then that's supposed to double between 2026 and 2029. So we're going to be seeing this huge influx in this boomer population that is, right on target to be moving into senior living.
Okay, so I got a bunch of questions on things I want to talk about with this. The first one I want to talk about is sort of the big elephant in the room. And I'm going to talk one thing first. One of the things and this is anecdotal, I don't know if there's any data that looks at this, and it may be different in terms of what you're seeing, but it feels like to me that this time around, as occupancy is improving, that there's a greater disparity, that there's some companies out there that are really crushing it. And there are companies out there that are continuing to really, really struggle. So I guess my first question is, are you seeing some of that as well? More that there's a bigger spread than it used to be?
Yeah, I think that it comes down to a lot of that is product and offering. I think that, as these boomers, these new seniors are coming into, interest in our communities, it's changing. What they're looking for is changing a little bit. I think that, across the country, the communities that we're seeing struggle with occupancy are the ones who haven't, for lack of better words, kept up with the times, right? They, just maintained, business as usual and haven't put any money into updates, renovations, expansions, anything new and fresh to keep their community relevant. I think the ones that are doing well have kind of paid attention to the trends and things that are happening, and, it's paying off for them.
Great. Okay. And so sort of continuing on this theme, if I were an operator, no, I'm not going to say exactly this way. If I were a cynical operator, I'd look at that number, and it's pretty encouraging. I'm thinking, man, I don't really have to do anything. I am just going to ride the wave until my buildings are going to be full, because everybody's going to be full because of all these new old people. And is new old people, is that a thing? Anyway, new old people and the lack of building and those kinds of things. And maybe the broader question probably really ought to be, what does this all mean? Where are there opportunities we need to be looking at?
Yeah, I think that the danger in kind of just sitting, resting on your laurels and not doing anything and saying, hey, this just means there's a lot more target market out there. I can get that much market penetration and, I'm just going to sit here. I think the challenge is developers are seeing these opportunities, right? And whether they're already in the senior living space or, we continue to see more and more that aren't in the industry getting into the industry because there's so much opportunity there, right? And by not doing anything, there's probably a certain percentage of that target market, who will be fine with the traditional senior living, right? But there's also this large percentage that, there's going to be new developments happening. The nature of this 1 million, 2 million people aging into senior living is going to create this huge influx in development. So if you're not keeping up with the times, we tend to see that that's what people are looking for.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing I would add to that is that, there are a lot of people out there who are focused on helping people not move into senior living communities, right? There's something like 400,000 home care agencies across the country. I mean, it's just an insane number.
Yep.
So let's start. So as you look at this change, this growing demographic, where do you see new opportunities, and what does it mean in terms of how you look at the market, how you research the market, how you study it? And so I'd love to hear how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously, given that we're looking at these boomers that are aging in and all the opportunity that's there, I think the largest opportunity is obviously an active adult, independent living, kind of that more of that lifestyle piece of senior living than the care component. Certainly, as they continue to age, that's going to be another piece of the puzzle going forward. But for right now, it's really that active adult and independent living. When it comes to how we assess that and kind of from a market feasibility perspective, I think that it's, there's kind of a standard way to do market feasibility work and studies and to look at a market. I think that though we need to change a little bit how we look at things and how we approach this, because with all of this growth, there's a lot of assumptions that we utilize in doing these studies that should probably be tweaked a little bit. When we look at, one of them is when we're looking at age. When we're looking at active adult independent living communities, a lot of market studies will just look at, okay, well, let's look at an age 75 plus population. But if we're looking at, an active adult product, we may want to tweak that a little bit, trend a little younger, potentially even put an age cap on it. I think that looking at each project and who you're trying to attract, what you're going to be offering and everything helps to guide those assumptions and what we want to use.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
So I want to explore this sort of figuring out the age bracket thing. A couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I got a chance to go visit Margaritaville, the first Margaritaville that was built.
Yep.
And it was an amazing experience. The thing that really struck me about it, though, was the average age. And that was 63. I mean, it was really shocking. And so I wonder if maybe when we look at that and say, well, we're going to shoot for an age 75, that we're actually shooting ourselves in the foot and rather than thinking bigger. I don't know. I may be wrong about that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. It's always an interesting conversation, right? Because I have a lot of developers who come and say, hey, I want to build this 55 plus community and everyone who moves in is going to be between 60 and 65. In reality, that's generally not the case, except for situations like people who have learned to do it very well, like that Margaritaville, the villages in Florida, very specific cases of communities that we find can attract that younger demographic. From a market study perspective, I always like to approach those projects being a little more conservative, right? Because if the project can be supported using age 70 plus instead of 65 plus, then the demand that's created between that age 65 and 70 who might actually be interested in your project is icing on the cake, right? If you know that it can be supported by the age 70 plus individuals in the market. So yeah, to answer your question, it's, I would love to have that secret recipe that everyone uses to get the average age at 63, but in reality, it's not what we see across the board.
Yeah, and I mean, I just, it's such an interesting question to me, but sort of related to this question. So I'm sort of a middle baby boomer, and I want to, there's a general belief the baby boomers are going to want products that are very different than what their parents wanted, and I don't know whether I'm quite sure I buy that. Do you have any thoughts? I mean, are the baby boomers different? How are they different? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know that the baby boomers are necessarily looking for that much different. I think we're finding in kind of the research that we do for clients across the country, boomers are more looking for options and flexibility and convenience and things like that. It's not that, you have to have this community with 18 million amenities because they're looking for everything under the sun. And, so I think it's how we look at approaching the offerings that we have and how we look at maybe pricing structures and things to meet a variety of different financial situations and preferences and lifestyle and things of that nature.
So I was reading an analyst report about a publicly traded senior living company this morning. And one of the things that was sort of commentary that really struck me was that in this particular company, they said, well, it's just really a commodity type product. And which is really another way of saying one size fits all. Yeah. And how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we see just in the senior living environment as it stands today, I don't think it's one size fits all. You have everything from, if you're talking pricing, you have everything from, affordable monthly rentals with nothing included basically to, more inclusive rentals to the CCRC, the entrance fee models and things. And you have communities with everything from, your basic amenities to your luxury resort amenities. So I don't see that changing at all. I think that the boomers, they're just as varied as past generations and, what they're looking for and things. So I think that is something that we're going to need to maintain.
So can we talk a little bit about pricing and how you figure that out and how you think about pricing?
Yeah. And I think too, the boomers are, stats show that they're one of the wealthiest generations, right? But they're also very tend to be careful with their money, right? So it brings this other component to the feasibility studies that we do and how we look at pricing, because although the numbers may show that they can afford, anything that we might want to build, it brings this component of, but are they willing to pay for it? So, I think when we look at assessing markets and, assessing opportunities, it's really important to break down the pricing to really test fee sensitivity in the market, to look at, where the breaks are in the market, where the most demand falls, and then kind of taking it one step further and kind of doing the consumer research in the market to really be able to test what I said earlier. Are they really willing to pay these prices? How much, do you have to build? How many amenities do you have to include? I think markets have, each market has their own nuances. What works for downtown Boston is not going to work for rural Kentucky. So, I think that, again, to your point of one size fits all, absolutely not, and we need to look at that when we're doing feasibility studies and really figuring out what should be built in a market. There's, all these different pieces of the puzzle that we need to consider.
So can you talk just a little bit more about how you actually go about figuring that out for any given marketplace?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we do our feasibility studies, we take the demand one step further. So, a lot of firms out there will say, okay, let's look at a $75,000 income threshold for our demands. And, whether you're looking at net worth or home value, that kind of wealth component of it. And, we'll set it at 500,000 or whatever that number is. We take it one step further because, like I said, we like to look at the fee sensitivity in the market, and we'll actually run demands at a range of price points. So, you come to me and say, hey, Melissa, I want to build this project and I want to charge $4,000 a month for it. I'll say, okay, let's start there and maybe test a little lower and test a little higher. And we can actually see how much that increase in price point changes the available demand in the market. So that's really helpful when it comes to determining your unit mix, figuring out, how many of those exclusive large units should you really build in your community, or, versus how many one bedrooms, et cetera, to really be able to make sure that you're planning for what the market can support.
So it seems to me like in virtually every community I go into that's in kind of a fill-up process, the larger units tend to fill up first. And that almost every time when I talk to the people who are leading on the ground, not typically the people who made the decision on unit mix, but they wish they had more bigger units and less smaller units. Is that just that's just anecdotal. Do you see that consistently, or what do you see?
Yeah, we see that pretty often too, but I think that, I think it's one of those things where we try to be as conservative as possible, right? And, developing a community is the same way, because you don't want to be sitting on 22 of these massive units that, even though the market said they could afford, we were afraid to build them because we didn't know if the market would really be there. So, that's where it comes down to, I think, like I said, to kind of step 2 of market feasibility and really doing your consumer research in the market, doing surveys, holding focus groups, kind of taking that next step of research to make sure that you're building what the market is looking for.
So to me, this is such a fascinating conversation. I find myself thinking, so if I test the market at 3,500, which is pretty low, I recognize, but let's say we test at 3,500, 4,000, 4,500, and 5,000. As you test those, would that be with exactly the same set of amenities and services? And so it's strictly about price? It's
strictly about price point when we test that, right? We just really want to see what the market can bear from a price perspective. And then we kind of work backwards and say, okay, we can build, 50 units at $6,000 a month. Well, okay, that means we can maybe more highly amenitize the building than we were maybe previously thinking about, if the market can support more of those higher priced units.
So do you ever go to the and I know I'm getting off a little weeds when we prep from this, but I'm just really fascinated by this. So let's suppose that we look at the marketplace and we say, well, $6,000 looks like it's the right price point. And do you ever go then say, well, if we added these extra things, we could actually go up to 6,500, and that would serve the market better and make it easier to fill the building?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always part of the tweaking process, right? So we'll make initial recommendations from the feasibility study and the numbers that come back. Then we'll do the consumer research. I get involved and work with architects and planners, and those are when the projects come out the best, because it really allows us to constantly be involved and constantly incorporate the feedback and the information that we're receiving. I think so many times, someone comes to me with basically blueprints for the project they want to build and said, here, tell me this works. And I'm like, well, that's not really the greatest way to approach this, but it happens more often than you would think. So
yeah, it's interesting you say that. I had a guy who's a real estate developer, not a senior living guy, who found me on the internet, and he wanted to buy me lunch. He was coming through town, and so we sat, and he was going into a market that I don't have your kind of expertise, but I know, close by. And he was telling me about how he's going to build this 300 unit rental place in kind of a low downscale market. I'm saying, I don't think, it's a beautiful dream. I just think you're just setting yourself up. And so I know that's got to be super, super frustrating when that happens. One of the other questions that I'd love to explore just a little bit is this. Are you seeing boomers, and this is one of the areas where I could see them being different at looking at a pricing trade-off, where they go, I don't really need as much space as I'd like, because it's just where I sleep and take a shower and eat my meals and store my clothes. I'd rather have more social time, more amenities, and accepting smaller units. Do you see that, any shift in that area at all?
It's a really good question. I think that's the case for some boomers. I don't think that there's a definite yes or no answer to that question. I think that this boomer generation is so varied in what they're looking for, what their expectations are, what they're willing to pay for. There's been a lot of research that has said that, the boomer generation is really into community, right? Being part of a community, being involved in the community and everything. So, to that point, I would say, yes, probably the amenity spaces, community spaces, activities and engagement and all those things that happen in a community are going to be perhaps a little more important than they have been in the past. But, I still think there's going to be those boomers who move into a community and, live in their unit and don't take advantage of everything that there is to offer, just like we see now. So.
Okay, so I'd like to spend the last couple of minutes talking about, I don't know, this may be even the most interesting part, right? So you've done all this market research, and you think you know what it is that consumers want. You're ready to go. You put some shovels in the ground and really committed to this thing. How do you go out and build interest? How do you make this actually turn into a real project that people are going to move into?
Yeah. Well, hopefully, if done right and you do the consumer research piece, the consumer survey that you really put in the market to get people's opinions and everything is really like marketing gold for blue sky projects, right? It's, those people who took the time to respond to a survey. So they're at least somewhat interested in senior living. And, we always like to use that as kind of our first little database to start to work from to market projects and kind of, build from there. And, I think too that when it comes to marketing these new development projects, it's so important to make sure that you have an ample budget to be able to do so and do so well. I think that people see projects that, and I think it hurts the industry across the board, right? New development projects that are announced and just kind of spin their wheels because they haven't allocated the marketing budget, and people put down a deposit and sit for 2 or 3 years because we have to reach a certain number of deposits before we can start construction. And it kind of almost gives a bad rap to new development senior living when we can't get the project off the ground. But I will tell you, it is possible with the right marketing budget.
Yeah. No, I think it is just such a big question. And I guess for me though, the bigger question I have is, and it almost applies to both new construction projects and even existing projects, is there's people say, I don't want to move into senior living. How do we change that perception? That because I've drunk the Kool-Aid, right? I believe that for nearly every older person that they will have better lives if they're living in community than living in isolation. And we certainly know the statistics about isolation and loneliness being the biggest killer of older people. So how do we get that message out there?
Yeah, I think, again, if I had that golden ticket to do that, I would be a multimillionaire. But I think that, it all comes down to education, right? It all comes down to getting people into your community, right? Seeing is believing. Everyone, has this perception of what senior living is, what it looks like, what a retirement community actually offers. And, I've seen so many instances where, new people have come in for an event or, some sort of open house or something. And, I've said, well, this isn't what I expected at all. Or, I was thinking it was this, and look at how wonderful this is. And, we've heard all the stories about, residents saying, I wish I would have done this sooner. What is there not to like? So it's just a matter of really getting your community name out there, getting awareness, hosting events and things that will not come off as salesy, right? And just an opportunity for people to come in and see what you're all about, and really get to know and learn the industry and your community.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. I have, this is going to sound a little weird, but I have a guy who does some handyman work with me around my house, and he is a big timeshare guy. He has, I know he gets like 1 million points a year, and then he actually resells them through Airbnb. And this last weekend, I was talking to him, and he and his wife were going to drive, 7 or 8 hours up to the Oregon coast to listen to a pitch for another timeshare offering. And they drove 7 or 8 hours, and they spent 3 or 4 days up there. And I find myself thinking that, boy, the people who were selling that timeshare, and I think they had to pay, $50 plus sit through a meeting, right? They really have figured it out in terms of creating interest. And I'm wondering if there are lessons that we learned from the timeshare folks about how to tell our story better. Any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, a lot of communities are starting to look at additional markets they can reach, additional ways to be able to market their community and really get their name out there. I think some communities are doing really well. There's a lot of interesting things from a direct mail perspective. The data that we're able to access to be able to target folks is getting better and better every day. It's changing, and the types of lists and the type of digital efforts and, everything we can do from a marketing perspective really is just continuing to improve all the time. So, being able to have those, situations where we can target something other than our traditional 10-mile radius, is definitely kind of the way of the future, I think.
So I'm gonna step way back to the beginning, because I was just thinking about this, and I'm really curious about this. So my sense is that typically what happens is somebody decides they want to build a new development, and so what they do, it's usually triggered by finding a piece of land where they look at that land and they go, "Aha, this would be perfect," right? And I'm wondering if that's really the right way. Do you ever see people saying, "I want to go build a senior living community"? and I don't know where I want to build it. I want to build it in the place where the biggest need is. It's going to be the
Yep.
easiest to sell. I mean, that would seem like a better way to do it, but I don't know if that ever happens.
It does. I've worked with a couple of developers who, have done just that. Hey, I want to get into the senior living space. I know I want to be in, North Carolina or South Carolina or Georgia. And, we actually will do a market identification study where we actually, look at the demographics by county, then by zip code, and really try and narrow down where there's pockets of, affluent seniors, or if it's a mid-level project, where that target demographic is with those highest concentrations. Then we take a look at the competition that's already in those markets to just kind of get a snapshot of what that looks like and run some penetration rates. And, based on that kind of more simplistic approach to demand, right, we can say, hey, here's, a 10-mile radius that you might want to look in. And here's another pocket that you might want to look for a piece of land in. And then once they identify a piece of land, that's when we can say, okay, now we know where the site's going to be. We at least know that there is a market here. Now let's do the feasibility to determine how many units we should build, what the unit mix should be, the amenities, the whole 9 yards, and kind of create that blueprint for the project.
Yeah, I really like that a lot, because I think it's real easy for somebody to look at a piece of property that's where you might even go, yeah, if the demand were here, this would be like a perfect piece of property, where in reality, you might have great demand and the property's only, you kind of go, But in reality, that land is actually a better opportunity, is going to serve more people, because ultimately this is about making people's lives better, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So any last words? What did I not ask you about that I should have? What did I miss?
No, I think we covered everything. I just, always like to put out there to make sure to do your research. We've seen, more often than I would like to admit, projects that, got off the ground because the feasibility work wasn't done appropriately or done at all. And, just making sure that you're doing your homework and paying attention to the market and the trends and listening to what the studies and the consumer research is telling you, so that you build a successful project.
Yeah. And that's why, frankly, you need a partner like SageAge, because we all know that you can go get a feasibility study that will show the property that you're in love with will support it, and that can be such a huge disaster that can cost tens of millions of dollars and really cause lots of grief for you and families. So I love your passion. I love your discipline to be able to do that. Thank you for spending some time with me this morning.
Thank you, Steve.
Looking forward to the next one. And with that, we will see you at the next Marketing Monday. I guess we'll actually see you at Tech Tuesday with Jordan tomorrow.